Australians go to the polls next Saturday. Tonight, our One Network News special brings you the final leaders' debate between Paul Keating and John Hewson. This took place in Sydney an hour ago.
Tonight, the debate which just might decide who will be the Prime Minister this time next Sunday. Now, with polls suggesting up to a quarter are still undecided, our debate could be that important. Now, tonight, as Dr. Hewson and Mr. Keating confront each other live and without commercials, we'll be judging it with the worm, our now famous little ready reckoner of how the leaders are washing with the swinging voters. The worm made its debut on the last debate and returns tonight new and improved because we've increased both the size and the scope of our sample. Tonight we have two studio audiences, one in Sydney and another in Melbourne. Now, we don't pretend for one moment that this is a perfect representation of Australia. But the market firm, research firm, ASI, has gone to great lengths to select 200 swinging voters who are yet to make up their minds which way they'll vote. Now, tonight, as before, each swinging voter is equipped with one of these perceptor monitors. Now, for tonight's debate, we've changed the computer program just a little. Tonight's debate is to be less structured than last time, and the two leaders will possibly talk over each other. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you're hearing when Mr. Keating is speaking or talking, would you vote like this? If you like it a lot, you go all the way. Similarly, when Dr. Hewson is talking, you like it a bit or you like it a lot. Now, if the two men are talking over each other, then you vote for the one that you think is getting the better of the exchange. The worm will give the state of play, the feeling of the 200 at any instant. And on top of that, on the right of the screen, there'll be the progressive score. Who's winning to date? Now, that score is marks out of 100 for each leader. So there you have it. Ring the bell, seconds out of the ring. The referee tonight is Kerry O'Brien, who at this moment is explaining the rules of the contest.
Kerry O'Brien, and I'll be moderating this discussion here in the ABC's Sydney studios. By mutual agreement, we've discarded the straitjacket formality of the first debate. This time, the only restriction on time is that each of the leaders must finish answers to any question within 2 minutes, although they shouldn't feel compelled to use the whole 2 minutes. It's my job to see that we get through as many questions as possible in the next hour, that we stick to the point, if that's not too forlorn a hope, and that by the end of the debate, both men will have had roughly equal time. They've also agreed on the right to ask questions of each other if the urge arises. So let's get down to it. Last time, John Hewson won the toss. This time, it was Paul Keating's turn. He's won the toss. So, although my first question will go to both of you, John Hewson will be accepting it first. John Hewson, I heard a comment on Talkback Radio the other day that neatly summed up the attitudes of many Australians today. This person described the two of you as bulldust in stereo. So what is the core difference between you both that people still seem to have missed?
Well, the main difference is, of course, that we have a plan, a detailed plan for the future of Australia, and the government doesn't. They've been there for 10 years, and all we have is an economy of queues, dole queues with over 1 million unemployed, hospital queues, over 100,000 who can't get treatment in hospital, education queues with kids who can't get into university or can't get into TAFE colleges or can't get apprenticeships even though they've qualified. But they still think that, as I say, bulldust in stereo, and that's evidenced by the fact that apparently, according to polls, 16% of people still haven't made up their minds. Well, the undecided vote is high. It's true. I'm not sure it's that high, but I think people are in the process of making up their mind, and the choice will come down to a group that's been there for 10 years. They've had their way for 10 years. I mean, the Prime Minister says he's had the Reserve Bank in one pocket and the Treasury in the other, and he's pulled all the levers, and that hasn't worked. I mean, we've got the worst situation since the Great Depression, and the comparison is ourselves, which we have a plan. We've been open and honest about it. We've laid it all out for people. And we've set the agenda now for 3 years. We've argued all the tough decisions.
But you still haven't convinced a lot of people.
Well, we'll see next Saturday.
OK. Same question, Paul Keating. Bulldust in stereo. What's the core difference?
I don't think it's about us. I think it's about what kind of... I think the real issue will be what kind of society Australia will be in 10 to 20 years' time, because this election's deciding that. And I think that all of those Australian values of tolerance and a fair go are basically at risk in this election, because we've been through a recession, an international recession. We're coming out of it. We've turned the corner.
I think yours came first.
We're coming out of it. We've turned the corner. And I believe we don't want to go to a dog-eat-dog survival of the fittest society. That is because we've been in a recession, we throw off all of the values the nation's had of decency, tolerance, fairness, fair go, throw it all to one side to go for a set of values which says if you're socially fit and financially fit, you're right, but if you're not, you're out. A dog-eat-dog mentality. What I'd say, Kerry, is this. We want to see Australia progress without wrecking Medicare. We want to see Australia progress without throwing away the wages and conditions of Australians to go to the sort of to Asian wage rates. We want to see Australia progress without massive cuts to the social wage, to education, to hospitals, to schools, and we want to see it without an unnecessary, burdensome, killing GST.
OK. Can I ask a question? I mean, what's fair about 1 million people being unemployed or 700,000 kids living in houses where neither parent has a job? That's 1 in 5 kids under the age of 14 who live in a house where neither parent has a job. What's fair about 100,000 people who can't get treatment in hospital? What's fair about all these kids who can't get university education or TAFE education or apprenticeships? I mean, where's the equity and the social justice?
How long's the question?
Yeah, and what's fair about a flat rate of tax on someone on unemployment benefits or low incomes who pay exactly the same rate of tax as a millionaire? What's fair about that?
Yeah,
what's fair about saying to kids, if your mother and father can afford to send you to university, you'll get a place. If not, you won't get a place.
It's not our policy.
What's fair about saying to a 16 to 17-year-old
Well, hang on.
kid,
Let's take the education. What is your policy?
Well, in terms of places, more taxpayer-funded places at university, 220,000 more places at TAFE College, more apprenticeships. And sure, I mean, after all those additional taxpayer-funded places are provided, we will allow universities to charge fees. John, and why shouldn't we? Because right now they can charge fees to foreign students. Well, a foreign student can get into our universities today, where an Australian student can't, even though the kids are qualified.
Well, they set the fees.
Yes, and where's the equity? Where's the equity in that? Well, we're keeping the HEC scheme. We're adding to the number of taxpayer-funded places, and then over and above that, we're giving people a chance to get a university education where today they're denied it. Yet a foreign student can come into Australia and get an education one of our kids can't.
Kerry, what John wants to do is to turn universities into business organisations. The government's created the equivalent of 19 universities of an average campus size of 10,000. That's 190,000 places, a 65% addition to university places in the last 7 years.
But you're 60,000
Now, just hang on. Let me just tell you this. I also allocated $730 million in the One Nation project, a statement, to technical and further education, vocational education. You said it was profligate. We say there should be a national vocational education system for kids. We build it up for them. When they leave school, if they wish to vocationally educate themselves, they can go into it. You say they can only go with a voucher. A 16 to 17-year-old kid with a voucher trying to design for themselves a TAFE course in colleges that don't exist, because you wouldn't commit the $730 million.
Very brief, John, because I don't want us to get bogged down for too long on one issue when we've got many. But just tell me this very briefly, John. Is there anywhere in the world where a voucher system similar to yours has actually worked effectively?
Don't misrepresent the voucher system. We're giving vouchers to young people who get their first job.
Yeah, but does the system work anywhere else in the world?
Well, look, I don't think it matters. I mean, we've designed a system that works in Australia.
Okay.
And don't forget, the vouchers are going to go to young people who presently can't get a job. They'll get a job at our youth wage, our youth training wage. They'll get a voucher for a TAFE course, and they'll get on-the-job training. That's better than our kids being couch potatoes.
Okay,
and that's the choice that the government's given.
Yours is a first.
Well, I'm not sure.
But a world first. They've never worked anywhere.
Well, so we should set the pace.
Kerry, set the pace. You're going to give a voucher to a kid on $3 to $3.50 an hour.
You got 10 seconds.
And if they're not on $3 to $3.50 an hour, they don't get a voucher. Could you imagine 16 and 17-year-old kids trying to design for themselves a course in institutions which you won't fund?
But their employer can design.
They've got to develop. In other words, there's got to be a commercial development of TAFE to take kids.
I'm going to chop. We could spend an hour on any one of these issues, but I'm going to chop this one off here. Paul Keating, you've made noises that are beginning to sound like an apology in the past few days. This may be the biggest audience you'll ever have again. So, in plain language, can you spell out the extent to which you do owe this country an apology? Well,
Kerry, look. The thing is this. When this economy was running at an unaffordable rate, when credit growth was twice our capacity to produce, when we were absolutely deluged with imports, I took the decision to slow the economy down. Australia would have been into a recession now, no matter what had happened. The whole of the international economy went into recession.
But you acknowledge that that recession would not have been as bad.
The United States, Britain, Canada, New Zealand, Europe, Japan are all in recessions. And they're in recessions because the boom in the 80s was unsustainable. We would have been in a recession. What we would have been debating now is the depth of it. Now, I mean, in hindsight, I would have brought interest rates down faster. But again, I always had to have the Reserve Bank to agree to do that. But the key point is, we're growing again. The Australian economy has been growing now for 5 consecutive quarters.
But
now, hang on.
Paul, for a lot of people out there, the key point right at this minute in regard to this question is, are you sorry?
Well, Kerry...
Do you owe them an apology?
Kerry, I've said I've taken responsibility as both when I was Treasurer and as Prime Minister, but I've also took responsibility when I became Prime Minister to get the economy restarted, which I have done. We've been growing now for 5 consecutive quarters, and last week the Australian statistician revised up the growth for the year to 2.4%. We're now growing faster than any Western economy. Now that's undeniable, and I don't think even Dr. Hewson will seek to deny that we've grown now for 5 consecutive quarters, because he did say 2 weeks ago we're going to go into a double-dip recession, which he knows is untrue, because we are growing strongly and we're growing faster, and that's where the employment will come from.
Look, Kerry,
are we going into a double-dip recession?
Kerry, saying he's sorry will not create one job. I mean, if he apologised to 100... if he apologised...
Somebody prepared to say they're sorry for a mistake?
But if he apologised to 100 of the unemployed per day, it would take him over 27 years to apologise. There'd still be no jobs. He has no plan to create jobs. That's what this election's about. It's about economic management and whether or not they've got a plan compared to our plan for creating jobs and solving the unemployment problem. Now, we can do that. As far as the double-dip recession goes, there is no evidence to suggest that we're in strong growth. None whatsoever. There's plenty of
anecdotes. What about the 5 quarters of growth? Well, there's the evidence that we're headed for double-dip recession, which you've now said on at least a couple of occasions.
That's right. I said we're in danger of double-dipping because we've seen some pretty poor profit figures. We've seen some pretty poor motor vehicle registration figures. We've seen some pretty poor building figures. I think there's a lot of other anecdotal evidence that suggests that employers are still laying people off.
How many other economists in Australia are agreeing with you and Peter Reith that we're facing the potential of double-dip recession?
Well, let me just go back. When we predicted there'd be a recession in the last election campaign, nobody agreed with us. When we said it'd be the worst recession in 60 years, nobody agreed with us. We were right both times, and we're still right when we say this economy is not out of recession. It is still bumping along the bottom at best, and although growth picked up, it's quite possible that in the December quarter growth has slowed down. And he knows it. I mean, he'd be the last bloke to tell you. At the last election campaign, he guaranteed there'd be no recession.
Kerry, the Australian statisticians' quarterly national accounts have us growing for 5 consecutive quarters. Last week, the statistician said we're growing at 2.4%. That happens to be the fastest in the world at the moment.
That's 15 months, John.
That's right.
Is that not credible?
15 months.
There's no significant growth there at all, and he knows it.
Come on, that's denying... Look, it's denying the undeniable. Kerry, it's denying the undeniable. It's denying... It's a bald-faced denial of the undeniable. And as well as that, we are slated to pick up towards 3 to 4% next year. Even our opponent, Access Economics, who did the work on Dr. Hewson's policies, say we'll be growing 3 to 4% next year. The Economist magazine has us at the front of other Western nations growing at 3%. The jobs started coming through in those January job figures. We're off. We've turned the corner.
And look, there were private forecasters that were saying that unemployment could go to 12%. And you know it because the unemployment numbers have not yet seen the impact of school leavers. The school leaver impact hasn't come through to the unemployment numbers. We've seen some pretty bad anecdotal evidence about people shedding jobs.
That's school leavers, and you get that.
They still want jobs.
Well, that happens that may be so, but that doesn't mean the economy's not growing.
But the economy's not growing. Look, there's been some measured growth, but it's been sporadic. Stock building, a little bit of, very flat. We've got very flat consumer expenditure, for example. We've got we've got motor vehicle registrations, which I think are about as low as when he came into office. We'd have to look at the number, but I mean the economy is as flat as a tack. Investments at or near its all-time low.
You've got 20 seconds.
Well,
response.
how come I have only 20?
That's all right.
Kerry, Kerry, look, the thing is this: how would a 24 billion spending tax help? I mean, the key thing is if the economy needs more spending and more growth, How could a spending tax, a GST, raising 24,000 million, equal to over half the income tax of Australia, how would that do other than push us back into a recession, cut activity, cut spending, cut sales, cut employment?
He knows it's wrong. He argued the opposite case in 1985. A GST,
Kerry, is bad for jobs, it's bad for business, it's poison for small business, absolutely poison for small business. There's 836,000 businesses out there. Only 90,000 of them get anything out of Dr. Hewson's policies. The other 730,000 carry a GST around their neck like a ball and chain.
You've introduced the GST. Let's get on to the GST. I'd like to deal with it for a couple of minutes with Dr. Hewson.
In 1985, he argued the exact opposite of everything he's just said.
Different time,
hang on.
And today he's saying that
we'll get back to that.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Different time, different policy.
Not what you said in 85.
We'll argue that again in a moment. John Hewson, you have had a bad run on the GST in the past week or so. Labor's negative campaign has bitten to some degree. Suddenly you announced that you'll have a GST summit if you're elected. Everyone can sit at the table. But will you be prepared to change any of the fundamentals?
No, and the policy was announced that the idea of a community panel, and this would be the first meeting of that, a forum to establish that panel, was announced in December last year. We didn't suddenly decide. But what we're saying to people is, look, the GST doesn't come in until October 1994. We've said consistently that we will need to take the community with us into that period, that people will have to be educated in detail as to how it will affect their business, how it will affect their lives when they get their tax cuts, when they get their pension increases, when they see the abolition of payroll tax and so on. And the best way to do that is to pull the community together. And after the divisive election campaign, after the divisive election campaign this guy has run, where he's divided the economy, I think it's important that we pull people together in pursuit of that common goal, which is reform.
You won't vary the rate of 15%. Would you add to the list of exemptions?
No, I don't believe we will. There are a few details being discussed with various industries as to where you precisely draw the line, but they are very small, they are minutiae. The list of exemptions is as it's been identified, the main ones, as you know, being food and exports and so on. OK,
so you're not really going to change anything significant. Why have it at all? You've already had one extensive inquiry anyway. Unfortunately, that inquiry was secret.
Well, it remains secret.
Hang on.
But we've announced our decisions on the Coal Committee report that you're referring to. But, I mean, the reason you do it is that you want people... As I say, this has been one of the most divisive election campaigns in our history.
John, you've been selling the GST on and off for 3 years. You've been selling Fight Back for 18 months, and you've been selling Fight Back 2 for 4 months. And all of that has included the GST.
We have a lot of support for the GST. But, see, our package is not just GST. It's a 20-point plan. 1 point is tax, and 1 part of tax is GST. So we sell cuts in immigration, for example. We sell $3 billion more into education. We sell an improved health system.
That's selling the GST. What I'm on about now is why you've held this... You've suddenly decided to call this summit in the last week of a 3-year effort to sell the idea of a GST.
I say we announced it in December last year. We didn't suddenly decide in the last week. There was newspaper speculation about whether or not we'd hold a summit, and I said we were planning to hold the first meeting of that panel in the early days of the Hewson government. I've been talking for days about an educational program, which is an important part of what's got to be done.
But you won't change anything?
No, the policy stands. See, it's not a summit in the hawk sense, because they had no policy.
It's an apologia. It's a con. In other words, what he's about, he's a policy he's decided upon, which is going to be across the economy, which is going to raise 24,000 million with a 15% GST. The details were to be examined by the GST Tax Committee, the Coal Committee. It's produced a 40-chapter report. Dr. Hewson has kept it secret right the way through the election campaign. That is how the GST will apply to every minute sector of the economy and each sector of industry and Australian life. He's kept it secret. He won't tell us. He has it in his drawer, and yet he's got the gall to say, look, don't worry, after you vote for us and after you're stuck with this thing, after you've got it for the rest of your life, I'll have a nice little discussion in a couple of months' time about how you might wear it. And, of course, that discussion can include all sorts of things. I mean, for instance, you might be telling us how you can't run it with a food exemption. So food might go back in.
It won't.
You might also tell us...
It won't.
If it was
scaremongering's not going to work.
If it was unfair to tax food, why is it fair to tax water? Why is it fair to tax clothing? Why is it fair to tax power? I mean, these are all the things which have been decided by Dr Hewson and the Coal Committee, which is kept secret.
Okay.
And we've got this sort of shambles
You've made the
proposition.
point. You've made the point.
But what's fair about your present taxes? If you add up sales
Before
tax...
you go on, John...
I'm just going to answer the 24 billion point.
You can add, but why wouldn't you release the coal report? Why can't you put that on the table?
What we've done is we've gone through... What the Coal Committee did was to collect 300-odd submissions from various industry groups and give us recommendations in relation to those submissions. We have had a long process of going back to those various groups and talking to them, and when we announced the changes that we thought should be made to fight back one in December last year, and all the others we've said we're not changing. We have some, as I say, some committees working on the detail as to where you draw a line, but it's a minute detail. And we've responded to all those submissions, and those industry groups are happy with the progress that we've made in response to their recommendations to us to change. A lot of them are very strong vested interest arguments to change. Just on the 24 billion, the Prime Minister has a sales tax which raises $9.5 or $9 billion. There's a payroll tax that raises about 6.
The states have.
Yeah, there is a payroll tax that raises about 6. Wait a minute. And there's also a fuel excise that raises 6. It adds up to about nearly $22 billion. We scrap all of those three in the development of the goods and services tax.
Kerry.
And he knows that.
Kerry.
And you know, he seeks to misrepresent the situation by saying that this is an additional tax. It won't be. You know, when you'll get an additional GST? In the unlikely event that he is re-elected, he would have a GST. I have no two ways about it.
Listen,
you supported it in 85.
You're so proud of your own policy. You're telling us it's the best thing for Australia, but then you've got to inveigle me in and say of me, which you know is untrue, that I'll support your policy. I won't support a GST. I'll never support your policy.
But you've said the
key point is this. The 24 billion is collected from Australian men and women and families, but it doesn't go back to them. It goes off to other people. It goes off to the top end of business. It goes off to big consumers of fuel. It doesn't go to them.
But let's address his point first.
It costs the average Australian family. I mean, this thing's going to raise money on the day it starts. It'll cost them $75 a week. They've then got a punt.
That's wrong.
They've then got a punt from Dr Hewson that they'll get some money back. But what it's going to cost them is $75 a week. And the greatest burden of that cost is going to fall on Australian women. They're going to have to secure that. They're going to have to secure that from their husbands. They're going to have to secure that in the family budget. They're going to meet that cost on day one. And when they meet it, for a start, it's 18 months away. It's not going to add one job.
Of course
it can't even start for 18 months.
Can I just
By that stage, we're well and truly back into growth and recovery. But Kerry, the key point is this. Once a GST is introduced in this country, it's there forever. And every small business... 836,000 businesses will be tax collection agencies. It'll cost them $6,000 a year costs to simply collect and collate this thing. And the impact of it is grossly unfair, inflationary and regressive.
John,
well, his tax system is there forever as well. I mean, can he explain to me why under the sales tax system you tax cotton buds and not cotton balls? You tax above-ground swimming pools, not in-ground swimming pools. You tax exercise books for kids at school, and you don't tax pornographic magazines. And I also remind you of what you said back in 1985 when you'd been rolled by the unions on tax reform. You gave a speech in the Parliament where you said, and it was reported in the Sydney Morning Herald at the time, honestly, it's no good saying one thing one month and something else the next. I would never say that a consumption tax is no longer appropriate. That was you, 1985.
That's the question.
One simple fact. The wholesale sales tax raises $9 billion. The GST raises $24 billion.
Add payroll tax.
That's Dr Hewson's numbers.
Payroll tax.
Yeah, but the Commonwealth doesn't levy payroll tax. The payroll tax is levied by the states. And if you...
Well, we're abolishing it.
If you cut the price of petrol and you take from, say, the state of New South Wales $500 million or $380 million from Queensland, they will simply add the excise on.
They will not.
They will put their petrol franchise fee on to recover the costs of the cutbacks that you're giving them.
We say quite explicitly they can't do that.
John, you'd have to believe in fairies at the bottom of the garden to think that states wouldn't jack up the petrol tax the moment that you took money from their financial assistance grants. Of course they will.
Speaking of believing in fairies, why would we believe you? Why would we believe you?
Hang on, let him answer the cotton buds and then you can respond.
We're going to have this silly situation. If you have a hot pie, it's going to be... a hot pie is going to be taxable, a cold pie isn't. Takeaway chicken's going to be taxable. A frozen chicken from Big W is going to be untaxed. I mean, this is the kind of nightmare that you're going to put through every retailer in this country to try and decide which is taxable and which isn't. There was a tremendous letter in yesterday's Sydney Morning Herald from someone in Britain who operated a food business in Britain. It went right through all this nonsense about how a VAT, a GST, operates in the economy. So don't talk about the problems of the wholesale sales tax. It's a minnow of a tax compared to this monster you have, John. 24,000 million, half the income tax.
Kerry, this election's not going to be fought on whether the price of a pie goes up or down by about 2 cents. It's about jobs, and it's about unemployment. It's about economic management. But the point I made in picking up these anomalies,
I believe it is about the GST.
Yeah, but I was picking up the anomalies he drew attention to. He's sitting on a tax system that he's put up 200%. He's increased sales tax revenue by 200%.
The second lowest tax country in the world.
He's put petrol excise up from 6 cents a litre to 26 cents a litre. He's never given anybody a bean in compensation. Not $1 has gone back to them. And he knows, as he said in 1985, that system is a lousy system. It ought to be scrapped. And that is precisely what we're doing, and scrapping payroll tax, and putting money back in people's pockets with a 25% cut in income tax, doubling of family allowances, and a host of other benefits. And he knows that. It's a better package than he advocated in 85 when he said it was essential.
Yeah, we can go backwards and forwards on this point, and I'd like us to move on.
Look, this is the second lowest tax country in the world. We share... just hang on, John, you had your say. This is the second lowest tax country in the world. We share second last place with the United States, and we're a decimal point from Japan, the lowest tax country. This country has a relatively small public sector. It doesn't need a GST.
Well,
a GST is recessionary. It's vandalism of our inflation rate. It's a flat tax. It's regressive. It's unfair. And as well as that, that's not the only cost Dr. Hewson has.
But when you say it's regressive and unfair, Paul Keating, you were going to introduce one in 1985.
But nothing like this package. Not taking... All the proceeds went back to people. They were there was overcompensation. We assumed for low-income earners that they spent everything. We assumed they saved nothing. We, in fact, assumed they ran their savings down, but we decided against it. I mean...
others decided against it.
No,
You didn't.
You got rolled. 7 years late... I had 7 years in between to come back to a GST.
You're older and wiser.
Too right.
Okay.
I mean, I woke up to me. The thing is this, Kerry, I've been there with the GST.
Okay.
I know what a mistake it would be.
Yeah, that's not what you said in 85. And you just said that the inflation...
Let's not keep...
Well, I'll just pick up a couple of those.
Well, briefly.
The inflation effect, he says, is going to be significant. 2%.
5%.
2%.
You'll add 5% inflation and interest rates.
Hang on. And inflation under you has averaged 6% every year since 1983. And secondly, we are going to cut total tax burden by about $4 billion.
You're going to lift the tax burden.
We're not. We're cutting the tax burden because we're putting money back into people's pockets. A 25% personal tax cut, a doubling of family allowances, an 8% increase in pensions. These are the benefits we're targeting people.
John Hewson, specific question, and I'm not going to ask you about birthday cakes again, but I've had a lot of people asking, ringing, faxing about rent, particularly in flats and units. Now, my understanding is that rent itself is not taxed by the GST.
Sure.
What about body corporate fees?
In terms of, say, in a retirement village, for example, they're not taxed either.
What about everywhere else? There's a lot of people renting in places where body corporate fees are a part of their rent. There are a lot of people on fixed incomes in units and flats who pay body corporate fees. What happens
Well, it depends what the body corporate fee is, but the body corporate fee in general, if it is taxed, will experience some real benefits in terms of the abolition of some of these taxes, which lowers the cost of running the units.
So, and this has been put to me, if you've got a plumber that comes to fix anything in the units, if you've got a painter who comes to repaint, a lift maintenance person, any of those things, they're all taxed at 15%. I've had one person who said
that... But it doesn't go up 15%.
Hang on, but the body corporate rates on their block of units was $80,000 a year, 38 units, and their body corporate fees, $80,000 a year. He's estimated, on advice from his local Liberal MP, that he'll be paying about... that building will be paying about $10,000 a year extra in GST. Now, surely that permeates back through the system for all renters in units and for everybody, retiree or not, who's living in a unit or a flat.
Well, all the plumbers and all the people that provide... Hang on, all the plumbers and the people that provide the services will see their cost base fall, right? Because when you abolish payroll tax and sales tax and petrol tax, it gets built into the cost of everything they use.
How many of the
First point, hang on, second point, there's very large increases in tax. A 25% cut in personal tax is just one example. A 25% cut. People are better off, significantly better off.
Much worse off.
They are significantly better off, and you know it.
They're $75.
No, look, we went to a lot of trouble designing
on the basis of the problems you've had at times in this campaign selling the GST, that you'll persuade renters in units and flats and owners of units and flats. No, not the rent, but the body corporate fees largely do.
But renters...
Won't that get passed on?
Hang on. Renters do not pay GST on their rent. To generalise the way you are is wrong. And as I say, there are a lot of cost reductions that come through the system in a situation where people have more money in their pocket. And look, he knows it because he advocated it in 1985, and we've got a better compensation package. We've got bigger cuts in personal tax. We've got bigger increases in pensions. But you also said on March 3, absolutely nothing will go up by 15%. I assume you mean that business will pass on any savings from the taxes you're giving back, but not even an army of tax police will guarantee no profiteering? Yeah, well, let me just answer that in some detail. Firstly, competition. Competition will. I mean, if somebody in one shop is trying to increase the price by more than one around the corner, people will go around the corner. That's the first point. Secondly, we have a competition commission that if you are guilty of price fixing, you can suffer a $10 million fine. Thirdly, we'll have the Prices Surveillance Authority, which will have real teeth, and which will investigate any claims by people that there's been any profit taking and failure to pass it on. And fourthly, we've said that we'll have a compact with the business community, and a number of the major retailer groups and others are already saying they're happy to sign that to ensure that the system is passed on. See, one of the things that we've got to... Hang on, we've got to make... I want to get away from the GST, and I've got to give Paul Keating one more response. We've got to make one clear point, though. The essence of this reform is working together. And I think people will work together to make this reform significant.
You've got enormous faith.
No, well, I do believe in Australian people, I do.
Kerry, because of the things you described, that is why the GST raises 24,000 million. This is over half the income tax. This will change Australian life forever. This is the most intrusive tax in the history of the country. Now, John is asking us to believe again in the theories to say that the Prices Surveillance Authority, a body which he has always opposed and John Howard's always opposed, will, a small agency, cover 830,000 businesses.
We're increasing
830,000 taxing points, 836,000 businesses. It's nonsense. They will not give back the payroll tax, the big companies. They'll hang on to it. They virtually said so. Dr. Hewson's own numbers are predicated on only part of the wholesale sales tax going back. This will be just an additional tax to the income tax. And let me tell you this, Kerry.
Briefly.
He's trying to say that in some way the goods and services tax provide tax cuts. It's got nothing to do with tax cuts. It's all given away. The goods and services tax raises 24 billion divided by the number of Australian families, 3 million odd families, will raise about $75 will cost the average family $75 a week. And that doesn't include Medicare. That doesn't include $32
The average family will be $56 a week better off after the GST.
That means, Kerry, let me just pick this point up. That means that John Hewson's got to get back to them $130 after they lose $75. Now, frankly, if anyone believes the Liberal Party's going to give them back $130, if they believe in that, frankly, they deserve to pick up the GST. They deserve to pick up the GST.
Can I move on? Let's talk employment. Paul Keating, John Hewson says you've got no plan, and certainly no one on your side seems to know how many jobs you'll create or how much you'll get unemployment down. The Treasurer says one thing, the Industrial Relations Minister says another, the Finance Minister says another again. Where will unemployment be by the end of your next term?
Well, a few percentage points, I think, down. Let me talk about it in jobs. In the accord we signed with the ACTU about a week and a half ago, we said that there would be no wage increases paid unless there's progress towards a minimal achievable figure of 500,000 jobs over 3 years. We think that's the achievable minimum, 500,000 over 3 years. Now, the economy is growing again. It hasn't been laden with jobs, it's been laden with productivity, but that's about to change because companies can't keep squeezing more production from the same workforce. We're growing. We've got a large stock of investments which can be triggered by a further investment allowance and a cut in the company tax rate to 33%. John Hewson wants to put the company tax rate up to 42%.
Yeah, but let's talk about your plan.
Plus the GST. I mean, nothing.
Your plan.
Right.
Your plan.
Well, our plan was from one nation to get the economy restarted. That's happened. It's grown for 5 consecutive...
Well, hang on. Let's just dwell on one nation for a second.
It's grown for 5 consecutive quarters. It's now growing at 2.5% a year. We now intend to cut the company tax rate back to 33%, provide a further 10% investment allowance for investment, providing it's done quickly. And we believe that that growth, plus the investment, plus the cut in the company tax rate, which will lower the cost of capital, will encourage more investment and more employment.
OK, well, now let me put to you your record. In a moment. You've already said what went wrong with the recession, but let's put the recession to one side if you can. Take One Nation. You said One Nation's worked, and you've now got growth going at 2.5%. What you said with One Nation originally, only 1 year ago, was the growth would be 4.75%. Then it was going to be...
most monotonous conversation.
Well, it's not monotonous to a lot of...
Hang on.
It goes to your credibility, Paul.
Well, Kerry, just answer this. Listen to this. We went through this on your Late Line program. Why did we revise down the growth? Because the rest of the world slowed up. Japan went into recession in October. Now, what are you saying to me, Kerry?
Hang on. Deficit forecast
hang on.
wrong.
You asked the question. Listen to the answer. You're saying that because the Treasury and the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet forecast a 4% through the year growth rate in February, but Japan and the rest of the world slows down in the second half of the year, therefore we're not entitled to say the 4% through the year growth would be 2.5%. 2.5%, it's faster than any Western economy.
Your foreign debt is growing faster than many other Western economies too.
You're quibbling over a forecast versus an actual...
I was going to put the forecast as one of several things that you've got wrong.
No, but in fact, you're quibbling over a forecast. Look,
all right.
My job as Prime Minister was to get the economy restarted and growing. That I have done. It's now growing, as I said, faster than any other place. And it's slated to grow into the big licks of growth in the coming financial year between 3 and 4%. Once that happens, we'll get the bigger licks of employment growth. We've turned the corner already, Kerry, and that's the point I'm making. For people to throw that away now, to throw that away and go down a GST binge, which we don't need, would be absolute vandalism.
John Hewson.
Can I just ask a couple of direct questions? You say that you can aim to create 500,000 jobs. How much will the labour force increase over the next 3 years?
Well, in the years I was in office, it went from 6 million to 8 million.
What will it do over the next 3 years?
6
over
million,
the next 3 years.
So don't talk to me about growth and employment.
Over the next 3 years.
It went up by 2 million in the 80s. When you toddled off out of public life in 83, leaving 750,000 people unemployed behind, I didn't hear any apologies or apologies from you. You left us with a workforce of 6 million. It's now 8. It's now 8. And the country you tell us, which is the model, New Zealand, has actually got fewer people in work today than it had in 1983. Now, as we see that 500,000 jobs added over the next 3 years, at least 500,000 over the next 3 years, in a steady, achievable, cooperative way, that is cooperating the workforce. Look at the accord we signed with the trade unions. Low inflation, we've got an inflation rate the lowest in the world, and you call it worse.
He's ducking the question because he knows that in the next 3 years the labour force is going to grow more than 500,000, and that accord document, in fact, admits...
Of
course it's going to grow more than 500,000?
The labour force is going to grow.
OK, so...
The labour market.
No, the labour force is going to grow more than 500,000,
Well, I'm sure about the labour force.
Because you're admitting in saying that unemployment's going to go up. Unemployment's going to go up under you.
The workforce is going to grow by at least 500,000.
You're only going to create 500,000 jobs. Unemployment, you're saying to me, is going to go up.
Only 500,000.
And you know why? Because you said once that if you didn't get 4% growth, you ought to give the game away. And you're not going to get 4% growth. And you're not going to get the unemployment numbers coming down. You know, and you've just admitted it, that unemployment is going up under you. It's going up under you. It must go up under you.
Hang on.
It must. On the numbers you've just given me, it must go up.
Kerry, how could you get... How could Dr Hewson hope to get 4% growth by putting a 15% spending tax on the economy? Now, let me make this point.
Well,
the fact that let me clear the point up. That is this.
Very briefly.
We will add at least 500,000 jobs to the workforce of this country in the next 3 years.
But it won't bring down unemployment.
We will do more, which will more than growth and bring unemployment down.
It won't bring down unemployment.
John Hewson,
you know that.
That's not true.
You've just appointed labour market economist Judith Sloan to your kitchen cabinet. On Late Line last year, she said...
She's an advisor, not kitchen cabinet.
She said 7 to 8% unemployment was the most likely picture through the 90s, no matter who's running things. She also said the other day that your promise of 2 million new jobs was optimistic, requiring at least twice the job growth of the 80s. That's hardly a ringing endorsement from your own advisor, is it?
But I don't look to my advisors to give me ringing endorsements. They were appointed, hang on, they were appointed because of their standing, their outstanding credentials.
Not because of their knowledge?
Yeah, their knowledge and their judgment. But the Business Council of Australia says our 2 million jobs number is in effect conservative.
Is she a credible economist, labour market economist?
Absolutely, absolutely, and so's the Business Council.
Well, she's saying 7 to 8% through the decade.
Well, we
outcome.
We believe in terms of our policy, you can halve the unemployment rate by the end of the decade, which is significantly lower than 7 to 8%. Over 2 million jobs, and we've shown you industry by industry where those jobs can come from. And you know, because we have the policies that will do it. Now, the Prime Minister's been talking about payroll tax. He estimated that the abolition of payroll tax alone, just one decision out of hundreds, if not thousands of decisions in Fightback, that one decision would create 200,000 jobs.
Who's saying
200,000
Who is
jobs.
saying that, John? Who's saying the 200,000 jobs?
The Prime Minister said that in the past.
It was said in 1977, wasn't it?
Yes,
yeah, without a GST.
Right.
Without
and
a
there's
GST.
a fellow in Queensland last week, and a business economist, he said 257,000 jobs.
And there's a fellow named John Freeburn, who's I think a friend of Fightback General, isn't he?
Well, I mean, he's an independent commentator too.
He questions that. That book of 24 leading Australian economists that came out last week, I think the best forecast for jobs through the payroll tax was something like 55,000 over about 2 or 3 years. That was the best forecast out of 24 leading Australian economists.
I think the Chamber of Manufacturers put it at about 175. A business economist last week in Brisbane put 257.
So
but my point is, it is a tax on jobs, right?
But who knows?
Now, hang on. It's a tax on jobs, and surely the abolition of a tax on jobs is going to create jobs.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm going to run with John for a minute, and because the time is your way at the moment.
Okay, then you know, we have a whole host of other things that will actually kickstart the economy. Our development... our investment allowance come accelerated depreciation, so $2 billion injection into the economy in the next financial year. The Rebuild Australia Fund puts $3 billion into infrastructure over the next couple of years. We bring forward half the pension increases and some of the family benefits and tax cuts to July of this year, put more money in people's pockets.
John, let me put one thing to you.
We cut immigration, which takes pressure off the labour market.
Let me put one thing to you. The micro-reform program that this government has set in place, you say has been too slow, too ineffectual. Yet the process of micro-reform that's been going on in the economy, both privately and via government policies, has led to some of the structural unemployment we've now got. You know, as well as I do, that productivity in this day and age means fewer people doing the jobs. Means fewer people doing more work with the aid of...
It does under his recession.
No, it does anyway.
It does under his recession.
It does when you're restructuring the economy. What you're promising this country is what he's done in spades. You are promising a much faster pace of micro-reform.
Absolutely not. No, hang on.
You're not promising a faster pace of micro-reform?
No, we are promising a faster pace of micro-reform, of course. Faster reform. But we aren't going to be dictated to, firstly, by the unions. They will not be able to block reform. And we will ensure that the benefits of reform do flow through to people in terms of lower transport costs, lower waterfront charges, lower telecommunication.
I understand that. You've said
which is very important. Secondly, the reason that there's been no productivity growth in Australia is their wage system. It's their wage system.
John,
their wage, the Accord has destroyed productivity in Australia.
One of the things you're going to do is sell telecom. British Telecom, in the next 4 years, is going to shed 112,000 jobs. New Zealand Telecom, which has also been sold, is going to shed 3/4 of its workforce in the next 3 to 4 years.
And Telecom, as it stands in Australia, is shedding labour. It's been shedding it for 7 years.
No, not as much as that.
It has shed a dramatic amount of labour.
Let me just finish the point and then I'll shut up. If Australian Telecom, after you sell it, sheds as many people as New Zealand Telecom sheds, that's 57,000 jobs.
But hang on.
And that's one illustration.
But that's not right. I mean, firstly, we are building a bigger and more dynamic telecommunications industry. We're not just privatising telecom. Now, hang on. And look, we have a unique capability in Australia of actually expanding our telecommunications market into the Asia-Pacific region, which means more jobs, not less jobs. So, let me answer it, right? And secondly, telecom has already been shedding a lot of labour under the existing structures. They've shed a lot and they have a plan to shed more, I'm told. Quite independent of any privatisation. So I believe if you privatise in the context of an expanded market and a more competitive market, you can have more jobs and not less.
You mean that?
Hang on, you only end up in this ridiculous situation of shedding people if you're run by the union movement And if you're tied to an accord which has destroyed productivity, there's only one way to get productivity back in Australia, and that is to go to workplace negotiations where there can be a direct link between the wages people pay and their performance. And until you get that system, you're not going to have productivity.
All right, well, on this point, let me get on to industrial relations.
Let me just deal with this thing about employment. The key point is here, the GST is bad for jobs.
No, it's not.
Now, Dr. Murphy, who did the work on Fight Back, modelled it in an econometric model.
Didn't model it.
And what he shows is that after 5 quarters, unemployment is up 2% and growth is down 4%. Now, that's what he shows, your own person.
He did not model
Now, can I also say, yes, he did.
He did not model
a shift from income tax to consumption tax. You know it to be true. Now, Kerry, can I say this?
Briefly.
The 2 million jobs, when Dr. Hewson was asked about it, this is a report in the Australian, in March he said, Dr. Hewson also admitted yesterday the forecast 2 million jobs the Coalition trumpeted when it launched its Fight Back package was, quote, only a judgment. Look, it has no status whatsoever.
We've released a paper to show you where those jobs will come from.
It's an absolute fraud.
Okay, and
the 2 million jobs, Kerry, is an absolute fraud. A total and absolute fraud.
No, it's not, because we released a paper to show where those jobs will come from, right across the board. Just take one example. Under our plan, we can quadruple the number of foreign tourists to Australia by the year 2000.
Where does that figure of 10 million foreign tourists coming to Australia come from?
It's an assessment of where... well, I mean, there'll be 140 Asians travelling alone. Travelling in the year 2000. And we've done a lot of work.
You've done the work?
We've done a lot of work, and we've drawn on the best available evidence.
So the 10 million figure is your figure?
Yes. Sorry, the 2 million figure.
No, the 10 million.
Oh, the 10 million figure.
10 million foreign tourists who are coming to Australia.
Absolutely.
By the end of... That's your work.
Absolutely. But hang on, if you get that, that's worth about 400,000 jobs in tourism alone by the end of the decade.
Silly
but 400,000 jobs, one industry.
Yep.
And we can get more in the car industry.
But that's based on your figures of the 10 million.
More in agriculture.
Okay.
More in...
We're going to have to move on. We're going to have to move on.
That's the key point.
Okay. I want to move on to industrial relations. Industrial relations. Paul Keating, you've been very critical of opposition policy on IR, but the truth is you didn't even start to reform outmoded, inefficient work practices until at least 1987. You had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the new reality. You were pushed from behind. You were pushed by a debate that was really sparked by conservative forces in this country. No matter what gains you've made now, surely you should have gone faster.
What we had to do between 83 and 87 was to get the economy growing, to get profits up and get investment going. The first couple of accords were basically about restoring the profit share and getting investment going. Under the Liberals, profits had fallen to pieces. Investment had stopped, unemployment was rampant. That was the first task, Kerry. In Accord Mark 3, I think it was, we started on the productivity cases, moving flexibly through the labour market. What have we got today? We've got enterprise bargains being struck all across the country cooperatively. Managers and unions and their employees working towards corporate objectives, common objectives, without any loss, without any industrial disputes. We've got industrial disputes at a 30-year record low. We've got inflation running at 1/3 of a percentage point. It's the lowest inflation rate in the world, 1/3 of a percentage point. And we've got productivity running at 3% for the year.
Okay.
I mean, what else have we got to do?
Do I understand it correctly?
Kerry,
that what you're saying is...
what else do we have to do?
Well, let me get this clear. Are you saying that when you introduced your financial market deregulation processes, despite the fact that many people, including some of your advisors, your own advisors, were saying you can't do this without doing labour market reforms?
Nobody said that.
Nobody said that?
No, of course.
That wasn't in your head either?
Kerry, look...
This is an absolute fiction.
This is a history of the great changes which this government has made. Financial market reform, labour market reform, waterfront, telecom, all of those things have all been done by us. And this is the point I was making earlier. Australia is essentially a remodelled economy. It's now growing again. It's turned the corner. It doesn't need these sort of draconian policies, filleting people off onto individual wage contracts where their only recourse are the master and servant provisions of the 19th century common law.
Well, let me put this question to you, John. It goes to that. On the other hand, let me put the question, you can talk.
Okay.
On the other hand, the breadth of change that you would force has created enormous disquiet. There are already stories in Jeff Kennett's Victoria of employers saying to workers, take a pay cut or a cut in conditions or you're out the door. I know that you've promised that anyone with a genuine grievance against a boss, that you'll help them fight the case in court, but what that means in the end is that they join the court queue as well as the dole queue, and that doesn't sound like great joy to me.
Well, I'll just pick up a couple of points that the Prime Minister made and then I'll answer that question. I mean, this talk about productivity being boosted...
And when John's finished,
yeah, but you know why?
Finished, we'll have to move on.
You know why? Because you're throwing 1 million people on the scrap heap.
Because of change at the...
No, only because you have had the worst recession in 60 years and that it's unemployment. Secondly, this notion of enterprise bargaining is a fiction. You have to be a member of a union to do an enterprise bargain, a Section 134 agreement, certified agreement under you. You know that, right? You have to be a member of a union. And only 1/3 of the private sector is unionised. There's 3.5 million people out there in the workplace have no access to your enterprise agreements. What you're saying you know to be a fiction. It has absolutely no substance whatsoever.
All right,
absolutely none.
Kerry, how much...
Paul, I said
absolutely
we're getting very tight on time. I said that it was one question each. I'll have to cut that there and move on.
Okay.
On health. John Hewson, one of Australia's most respected clergymen, the Reverend Alan Walker, and I don't think that's an exaggeration, gave you a huge serve on Thursday over health policy. He says that bulk billing by doctors will be abolished for all but a few categories. He says that many struggling families will have to pay higher doctors' fees up front, many families that don't have that money, and that they'll have their Medicare refund reduced from 85% to 75%. What do you say to Alan Walker?
Well, a number of things. Firstly, Medicare stays. It stays.
We're talking bulk billing.
Hang on. And secondly, Medicare is going to be improved as we deal with the hospital queues. In terms of bulk billing, it's not an insignificant number of people who stay on. Somewhere about 4.25 to 4.5 million people stay on bulk billing.
Out of how many?
That is pensioners. All social security recipients, low-income earners and so on, are protected. They stay on bulk billing.
Low-income earners up to what point?
Well, you know, people who receive benefits of various sorts, sole parents' benefits, disability pensions.
So less than $20,000 a year?
Yeah, it would be, yes.
So if a family's on $25,000 a year, they've got to cough up.
Wait a minute.
$32.
But then, no, and the $32 is wrong. You know that to be wrong.
Front.
I have a letter here from the AMA saying, on behalf of 20,000 doctors, that our policy is not going to result in them changing their fees. They are not going to change their fees. This is a Labor lie in this election campaign that fees are going to go up, doctors' fees are going to go up.
You're placing enormous trust in business. To be honest, you're placing enormous trust in doctors to do the right thing.
Well, I mean, doctors are respectable people. They write me a letter and they say on behalf of 20,000 doctors we can say we're not going to change our fees and that this is a Labor lie in this campaign. I think that's a pretty persuasive statement. And I think, importantly, we are going to deal with the question of hospital queues. Now, with 100,000 people... Look, does the Prime Minister have private insurance? Do you have private insurance?
No.
But you should have, shouldn't you?
Why should I?
Because
I believe in a public system that works.
But the very fact that you don't have private insurance means that you and your family can take beds in public hospitals that should otherwise go to those people who are waiting in the queues. And you know that. You know that, don't you?
In a moment, Paul, you can answer them. But let me put this to you very briefly.
Well, can I make that point? Because it's a very important point.
This goes to that point.
It's a very important point.
And the fact is that under your system, you will hit a family where the husband and wife are earning between them $50,000 a year. If they've got 2 or 3 children, it doesn't matter. Let's say they've got 3 kids. You're going to penalise them $800 a year if they don't take out private health insurance. Right. $50,000 a year for a family like that, I would suggest to you, is right smack in struggling middle-income territory.
But
very often...
They get tax cuts.
They'll pay $1,000, maybe more, for their private insurance. You're saying they don't have a right to a public hospital.
Now, what I'm saying is, let me say 2 things. One, the point I was making about the Prime Minister is wealthy people like the Prime Minister ought to pay for private insurance so that people do not die in the queues waiting at public hospitals.
You've said that.
People will not die in the queues waiting at public hospitals because wealthy people should.
You've said that.
Okay.
What about the case I put to you?
Okay, so you have to make a decision as to where you cut off and at what point it's appropriate for people to start to take out private insurance. We made the decision at $40,000 for a single and $50,000 for a couple on the grounds that at those income levels they're getting very large tax cuts, and if they've got kids they're getting a doubling or you know, or whatever their income level is. They're either getting a doubling or a 50% increase in family allowances. They've got a lot of money targeted into the system, but to make the system work you've got to get people to take out private insurance. He should be required to take it out, and so should all the wealthy.
That's right.
But hang on. No, he should be required to take it out. Penalised if he doesn't, so that the money can be actually channeled to those in need. And the low to middle income earners who don't have any access to private insurance are going to get tax rebates, money in their pocket to take out private insurance, so that you know. So
well, I've got to put the same question to him, and we're getting close to time.
The point is that they will get treatment which they don't get now because they're sitting in a hospital queue, and you're keeping them in that queue by not taking out insurance.
Let me put the question to you, and you can answer him at the same time. The evidence is clear that you haven't been able to contain health costs, or you wouldn't have had to put the levy up. You can't keep doing that every time the bill gets too high, so how do we know that you won't have to change the system yourself in the future?
Because it's been stable at around 8% of GDP.
But you've had to put the levy up.
It's going to double
stable, but services, diagnostic imaging, pathology is all improved over time. I know.
There's costs
but
going up.
We've got it at half the American system. It costs half as much to go to a doctor and have an operation in Australia, which is half of what it is in the United States.
But the trend is up.
John Hewson wants to send the Australian medical system, health insurance system, towards the American system.
Wrong.
Can I just tell you this, Kerry? Let me deal with this. John Hewson wants to abolish bulk billing for 13 million people who now pay nothing at a doctor. Nothing. They take the doctor.
Should everyone be bulk billed? Should everyone be bulk billed? Isn't that contributing to overuse of doctors?
Let me say that's the 85% back. That's going to cost them $32 up front. If they have 2 kids who are sick, it's $64 in a week.
That's right.
If they're on an income over $45,000, he's admitted tonight he's going to make them wear a penalty of $800 a year or $16 a week penalty for not being privately insured. He's going to force you to privately insure yourself. And then it's going to cost you $20 to $30 a week to privately insure yourself. And even after you do it, Kerry, the consultation's going to cost you $14 net. Now, if you're poor and you can't afford it, it's $32 up front and you get nothing back. But if you're insured, it costs you $14 net. At the moment, that costs nothing, or it costs 15% of the consultation if you don't bulk bill.
Less than 3% of doctors charge the $32. Less than 3%. And here's a letter from the AMA saying, on behalf of 20,000 doctors, that they are not going to change their fees. That is a blatant lie, and you know it.
They'll write anything you ask them to write. Anything you ask
say
them
or
to
do
write.
anything to get re-elected.
We've got to
say or do anything.
They will write a letter for you. Anything you ask them to write, they'll put in because the doctors' unions what you're bidding for.
We've got a few minutes left. Can we move on? Can we move on very quickly?
Can I just say this, Kerry?
We're out
it's
of
a
time
rotten
on that,
system.
Paul. We're out of time.
His proposals.
Mandate. If you get into office, we've got the Democrats saying point blank that there are a number of key elements of your plan that they will reject in the Senate outright. Not that they'll sit on quietly and toss over in their minds. They will reject. They will reject your interference on Medicare in their terms. They will reject the GST. They will reject key elements of your industrial relations. Now, on the basis of what you've said in the past about that, what John Howard, at least one of your senior ministers, shadow ministers, has said about that, you will force another election if your key elements are thrown out. So that means that this country will face another costly election process in a year or possibly even less.
Well, I don't accept that because I don't believe, firstly, that the Democrats are going to matter. And I think it's a good point that both of us would like to make.
They've already got 5 senators.
Hang on,
John.
but I can. And secondly, I mean, just
they've already got 5 senators sitting there.
The vote is polarising, so we'll see what happens. I haven't given up our hope of winning the Senate or winning enough in the Senate to have influence. Secondly, he has said that the Prime Minister said that in opposition they will vote for our package. They will vote for it. So it doesn't matter what the Democrats do. He's going to vote for it. And he reiterated it today. So this issue will not arise. And thirdly, surely, by going out there and openly and honestly saying what needs to be done, we not only will get a mandate, we will deserve a mandate. And if democracy means anything in this country, we ought to be allowed to implement our policy. And that's where we stand.
Very briefly, Paul Keating, you are going to stick by what you said in the Parliament? You will support the GST through the Senate from opposition?
I expect to win the election, Kerry. There'll be no GST.
We all know there is a very strong...
There'll be no GST under us. And the advice I say to people...
It is abundantly clear to everyone that you stand a second-to-none chance of losing this election. And you stood up in the Parliament late last year and you said, we will support the GST through the Senate from opposition. You're prepared to canvass losing the election then, you must canvass it now.
What I'm simply saying is that the Labor Party always observes the conventions. And the conventions are that the money bills of the government of the day are passed.
So you'll support the GST?
A GST, which is a tax bill of 24,000 million, half the income tax is a money bill of the opposition. And I believe it should therefore pass the Senate.
OK, we must come to the final question.
Even though I say I'm vehemently opposed to it and am campaigning against it.
OK, we must come to the final question to each of you. Final question to each of you now. John Hewson, you're proposing a number of policies, a very broad and radical stretch of policies across the whole cross-section of society. You're doing it in the 90s. Many of those policies reflect the policies and the philosophies of Thatcherism in the 80s and of Reaganism. And they do represent significant change. 2 things. Can you really ask the people of Australia to take you on trust that you'll deliver the changes, the radical changes that you say you can do? after they've already suffered themselves a decade of change? And secondly, why should they have confidence that you're right when governments are being rejected in other parts of the world who have been pushing many of those policies for the last decade?
Well, you can't translate the experience of any other country to Australia. There is no attempt by us to be a Reagan or to be a Thatcher. That is just dead wrong.
But Thatcher's addressed your own party.
But so. I mean,
right,
you know, a lot of people talk to us. But the fact is that we designed a policy package for the circumstances today. And why do we do that? Because we are absolutely appalled at the prospect that is in Australia today, that under the sort of policies you've seen of this government, we are about to see our kids inherit a lower standard of living than we have in fact enjoyed ourselves. It's harder, hang on, it's already harder for them to get a job, for them to get an education, for them to buy a home, for them to settle down, for them to prepare for their retirement. It's much harder than it was for us. And that is absolutely unacceptable in a country like Australia. We're a wealthy country, natural resource wealth, great mines, great farms, great manufacturing industries, great tourism and other service sector in Australia. We're well placed on the edge of the fastest growing region in the world, the Asia-Pacific region. We owe our kids a better break. They deserve a better break. They've had 10 years, these guys, and they haven't done anything but make it worse. In the last election, they promised no recession. Today, we've got the worst recession in 60 years. Unemployment's gone up by nearly 500,000. It's nearly doubled since the last election. And our living standards have been cut by about 3.5%. We are going backwards, and all the countries in our region, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, China, Malaysia, they're all outperforming us. And if you'd said that to me 15 or 20 years ago, I would have thought you were out of your tree. How on earth could they outperform us? But they have, and we've become marginal, and the bottom line is our kids are facing a more restricted range of opportunities, and I, for one, will never accept that situation. That's why we've done what we've done.
Paul Keating, you've been hammered through this campaign by Keating-Hewson saying you're tired, you've run out of steam, you've gone off the rails, you've got no plan. And the reason they're saying that is because they know that your credibility out in the electorate on the economic management of this country has been shot to pieces. You've concentrated mostly on a negative campaign. Do you deserve to be re-elected on that basis?
Yes, because the economy is growing again. We're going to get back to strong rates of employment again. The economy is growing now, not in the future. It's happening right now. We've kept the social wage together, Medicare, a decent social security system, cooperative industrial relations, not confrontation. We're not pushing people onto master and servant common law contracts. We've got that cooperative spirit still in the economy. We've changed all of the micro areas of the economy as no Conservative government could ever have done. We've given Australia an industrial future where the Liberal Party gave it a past as a farm and as a quarry. It's now able to lock itself into the Asia-Pacific, selling innovative products produced from the product of our education system, because only we have decided to bring Australian kids through secondary school and put them into tertiary education and into TAFE. The kind of society Keating-Hewson wants, the policies he wants, is a radical shift for the worst. It's not change for the better, it's change for the worst. It's a radical shift back to the policies of reducing the Australian national values to the lowest common denominator of an individual, just on the model of Thatcher 1979 and 80. The whole cooperative spirit would go. We would lose the impetus that we've now got. Australia is largely restructured. Our future in the 90s is profound. We're one of the best parts of the world. We're growing now faster than anywhere else.
Wind up.
And that's why I say the notion, and can I just say, let's not kid ourselves.
5 seconds.
My kids have got a much better standard of living than I ever had as a child, and I'm sure that's true of every Australian kid. Let's not have this nonsense that we're actually worse off today than we were 20 or 30 years ago. We're miles in front.
We're a country of queues.
We're kilometres in front.
Country of queues.
That's where we leave it. The debate is over. Thank you both very much to Paul Keating and Keating-Hewson.
Well, now for the results of our poll on tonight's debate. Remember, all 100 people in Sydney and 100 in Melbourne have been carefully selected as undecided voters. To our question, who won tonight, this was the result. 54 for Keating, 33 for Hewson and 13 undecided.